Hello everyone and welcome to my in-depth video about Theorycrafting Zyra damage. I'm Melyn, a Master Tier Zyra 1-trick who plays Zyra in all 5 roles. I have put together a spreadsheet that combines almost everything imaginable to calculate damage done with many variables. If you don't care about the math and only want to read the conclusions, check out my blog post in the video description. Otherwise, strap yourselves in because this might take a while. Alright, so we're going to start by talking about the calculator itself and providing some warnings. The most important thing to be aware of when dealing with spreadsheets like this is what it does and does not say. This spreadsheet will tell us how to maximize certain aspects of our damage with the minimum cost. It does not consider CDR, mana regen, defensive stats, utility, or really anything else. It is then up to the individual to decide whether or not a certain item is worth it. As for the formulas themselves, they involve levels, skill orders, runes, masteries, enemy stats, items, combat details, such as the number of skills used and the duration of the fight. As an output, we have everything in the messy sheet below, but also a small selection of topics of interest in a formatted box, such as damage from individual skills and items, AP, CDR, and damage numbers. So the two most interesting things here are total damage and extra damage per gold spent. Total damage is pretty self-explanatory. Extra damage per gold spent compares the damage we would deal with 0 items with the damage we would deal with the selected items, looks at the difference between them, and uses the cost of the items to find out how much damage we're getting for the gold we're spending. The number itself is not particularly interesting, rather how it changes with different builds. The final thing to note here is that the formulas are about optimizing damage. Optimizing damage is nowhere near as important as positioning, CSing, target prioritization, game sense, and you get the idea, right? The best way to improve at League of Legends is focusing on what I just mentioned, not just to theorycraft small builds. But still, this is something that can help and is quite fun, so here we are. If you want to use this calculator yourself, find the link below the video description and follow the instructions on the right-hand side of the spreadsheet. Furthermore, the spreadsheet can be useful for other mages as well, with only small adjustments necessary in the skills section. Alright, so before we go into item builds, I want to quickly remark on Liandry's Torment, as it is the only calculation that I did not automatically total for the damage section. Though I do note the amount of damage one proc would do against a full health target, which can be separately considered and weighed as to ascertain the value of the item. Alright, so now for item builds. This will be primarily for solo lane Zyra, but I'll make remarks and support Zyra at the end of this section. We're going to look at both poke damage and all-in damage at 3 stages of the game: when you get your first item, when you get your second item, and when you get to your full build. So we begin by looking at one item poke, a standard QW auto combo for Zyra. This procs Thunderlord's Decree, forces plants to auto attack, so they will likely hit twice, although we'll only assume they're going to hit once, with the goal being to not overestimate the survival of plants, because that is really important depending on the matchup. Alright, so you can see here that, as expected, Liandry's and Luden's are the best for poke, as they have passives specifically tailored to excel at it. Next, again as expected, are penetration items. Finally, some other items are shown to trail behind, though these are made for sustain or burst, so it's natural that they don't excel at poke. If you want poke, rush Liandry's or Luden's, where one gives more health and the other gives more movement speed. For an all-in scenario, we assume the same stats, but this time an EWR-QW combo with 3 auto attacks, 2 enraged plants, and each plant attacking twice. Again, we'll see that even without the tick from Liandry's, it gives about as much damage as Luden's Echo. The top items here are penetration and burst active items. You can value health and MR as you wish, as well as how much you value all-in and poke, but the data suggests that the best first item for Zyra is Liandry's Torment, even if they aren't stacking health. Luden's and Void Staff, especially if your opponent is rushing MR, are excellent. GLP, Abyssal, and Protobelt are all solid if you want mana, MR, and mobility respectively. Alright, we now consider 2 items, so let's say level 13, 1500 health, 57 MR, the enemy team likely has a Locket by now, and 53 armor, okay? So, it's much less likely that we can QW auto an opponent at this stage in the game, so we'll just assume for the poke calculations that we're spawning max range plants that attack twice. Last section we showed Luden's and Liandry's are best for poke, so it should come as no surprise that combining them is the most poke you can get with 2 items. Other very strong combinations are Liandry's with Void or Rylai's, remembering that the slows double Liandry's passive. If you rush Luden's though, Rylai's second becomes much worse. Also keep in mind that if you have Luden's Echo and you get 2 plant attacks, that also procs Thunderlord's Decree, which is not included here. So that makes Luden's even better for poke, but of course we kind of already knew. For an all-in, we assume the same stats with an EWR-QW auto attack combo. This very strongly suggests that you should get Void Staff as your second item whenever possible, unless you're already doing true damage if the enemy team has no MR. So GLP gives great burst damage if you can get it in your combo, and Liandry's is amazing even in a burst situation. Don't go Rylai's unless you already have Liandry's though. Looking at the recommended first items, I suggest the following 2 items for pure damage. Liandry's into Void, Luden's into Void, Void into Liandry's, GLP into Void, Abyssal into GLP or Liandry's or Void, Protobelt into Void. I think I'm repeating myself, but you guys get the idea. Void Staff is a great second item for Zyra. Okay, so once you get to 6 items, most of the time you're only going to be getting 1 plant attack off for your poke, and almost everyone on the enemy team will have at least 1 defensive item. So we're going to assume level 18, 2500 health for some squishy target, 100 armor, 100 MR for our target, okay? So for poke, we combine the super poke trinity of Liandry's, Luden's, Rylai's with a full damage trinity of Sork's Void and Deathcap to maximize poke. You can sub out Deathcap for a defensive or utility item and actually not lose very much poke damage. The main thing here to maximize your poke is Rylai's, Liandry's, and Luden's. Luden's makes sense, Liandry's makes sense, and Rylai's doubles Liandry's effectiveness when you just have that 1 auto attack from the plant, okay? As for burst damage, to maximize your all-in burst damage, you will always want Deathcap, Liandry's, Void, and a Hextech item, leaving your last slot for a defensive item such as Abyssal or Zanya's, or a poke item such as Rylai's or Luden's. Combining these 2 tables leaves me to recommend the following builds. So here's an ideal build. Number 1, say if you want to focus on all-in, okay? GLP or Protobelt, some offensive item with an active, Sorcerer Shoes, Void Staff next, Liandry's, and then Deathcap or Rylai's is your last 2 items, and get them in whichever order, whether you want more burst or more poke earlier or utility. So a second item build is also very good, and this is the poke build from hell, okay? While still having very good all-in damage. So Liandry's, Void, Sork's, Luden's, Rylai's, Deathcap. And since this build gets a lot of very early penetration, you may, probably not, but I can't believe I'm saying this, you may wish to delay Void Staff until your 3rd item if, check how much magic penetration you have, if you're almost doing true damage already, because you don't want to waste the penetration, okay? Penetration is a very expensive stat. It's very good if you're using it, but you don't want to do more than will work, okay? And then we have 2 builds here that are basically the same. If you're in a scared matchup where you want to build defensive and you're worried about dying, so all that is just starting with some kind of health item, so either GLP or Protobelt, and then building into your main defensive item, Abyssal or Zanya's, okay? And the way this works, remember, is that health and resistances stack very, very well together, so if you're worried about dying, you need to build both of them, okay? And a lot of times you may just want to sit on a Seeker's Arm Guard or sit on a Negatron Cloak and then start building health, unless you really, really need the active from Zanya's. But yeah, get one of these Hextech items and a defensive item, and the order is, how you see fit. Then get Sorcerer Boots, Void Staff, Liandry's, and Deathcap. It's a very, very solid build. Great poke, great all-in, and it's what I recommend here. Alright, so I want to talk about a few important ideas and conclusions for this section before we talk about support Zyra, alright? So the main thing, well, there's 7 things, so I won't say the main thing. One of the biggest things is that Luden's Echo is for poke. It is not a burst item. A lot of people think it's for burst, but as far as Zyra is concerned, it is much, much better for poke, and honestly quite mediocre for burst damage, okay? If you want burst damage, get a Hextech item like Protobelt or GLP, or even Penetration is about just as good if you're not really wanting those actives, okay? The second thing is I really don't recommend getting Rylai's until after you have a Liandry's, unless you really, really, really need the passive, okay? Rylai's gets so much more gold efficient if you have a Liandry's Torment, alright? So the next thing, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but remember to build both health and resistances if you're nervous about dying. I did a different video a while back. I might put it in the video description. I did a different video a while back showing, you know, the relationship between resistance and health. But the short answer is you want both if you're worried about getting burst out. All right. So number 4 point I want to make is Hextech items are some of the best for burst damage. Penetration items and Hextech items give you the most burst for your buck, alright? Deathcap is alright, but you really only want that later on in your build, as it has a terrible build path, it's super expensive, it delays your power spike by a lot, and it really only becomes extremely powerful when you have other items anyway. So if you really want burst damage, get a Hextech item or get more penetration, such as Haunting Guys, Void Staff, Sorcerer Shoes, stuff like that, alright? So next up, I jumped the gun. Deathcap is great for burst, but it's not so great for poke. Alright, that makes sense. Your plants have terrible scaling, and there's no special active or special passive in it, such as Liandry's or Luden's. It's going to make it more effective, okay? Number 6, Liandry's is really, really, really good for poke. We knew that, right? And it's good for burst too. But it's even excellent for burst if they're building health. So really underrated, well, overrated item. No, wait. I don't build Liandry's enough, but it's very famous a Zyra item, alright? I'm going to stop myself right there. Alright, last point I want to make. For damage, as long as you aren't going true damage, I recommend getting a Void Staff as your second item, unless you need health, in which case you can get a health item, but then get Void Staff right afterwards, okay? Okay, so those are my conclusions for item builds for mid lane and top lane Zyra. Now, for support Zyra, I think all of this data cements what we already kind of knew about building Liandry's into Rylai's. And you can still rush Rylai's if you really value the utility, but I think Liandry's first is much better in almost every situation. For your next item, you can rush Void Staff for damage or Luden's for poke, and close the build with either the previous item that you didn't buy, or a situational item like Banner of Command or Zanya's Hourglass if you feel you don't need more damage, rather. So, of course, this 4-item build assumes that you're building Eye of the Watchers, but recently Ruby Sightstone has been buffed, but as I don't recommend building many active items on Zyra, I think you lose a lot of its worth in a usual game building Ruby Sightstone, so I usually prefer Eye of the Watchers. Alright, so I want to close this video with 2 sections, one on rune pages and one on Thunderlord's Decree versus Deathfire Touch. So for runes have a much smaller effect than item builds on your actual damage output, but the short answer is that you want to run Magic Penetration Marks, Magic Penetration Glyphs, and Magic Penetration Quints whenever possible. These are the runes that give you the most damage, and you can run defensive seals. But again, this is only whenever possible. I still take MR Glyphs and Armor Quints against tough AP and AD matchups respectively. If I'm really worried, it's better to lose a little bit of damage and not feed, right? So take defensive seals whenever you need them, absolutely. But if you aren't in danger of dying before you get a few items, go for the Magic Penetration. Hybrid Penetration isn't awful, but it's about the same in the early game, even with the extra damage on your auto attacks, and it's a fair bit worse as the game progresses, so I don't prefer them. Finally, Magic Penetration Glyphs even scale better than scaling AP Glyphs in the late game, so they aren't very worth it. Though running scaling CDR Glyphs is solid if you want CDR and don't have it in your build. Alright, so that's it for runes. Let's go to masteries. So we're going to compare the first 2 mastery trees, the Ferocity and the Resolve tree. And most notably, what we're going to be looking at is percent penetration versus flat penetration, and Deathfire Touch versus Thunderlord's Decree. So my thoughts for a while were that the Ferocity tree is stronger in a late game situation, even in burst scenarios, and this is confirmed by my spreadsheet. What is surprising is that even as early as a level 6 all-in with Liandry's, Deathfire Touch still gives more damage, as it's constantly applied throughout the fight. Still, Thunderlord's Decree is much better for early trading. I recommend running Thunderlord's Decree in a very aggressive lane and running Deathfire Touch in a lane where you think you can get away with it, and at the same time not pressure easily. They're both great summoner spells, so experiment with them and find out what you like the best. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. You can ask them here, on my Twitter, on my stream. You can also check out my text guide that I update every few patches on Zyra. All of these links are below the video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and may your enemies feel the thorns embrace. Oh, also, by the way, I don't usually wear sunglasses when I record videos. I wanted to read my script, and I didn't want my eyes to be moving, so thanks for watching. See ya.